Comfort is slowly destroying you. Not hardship, not struggle, not the difficulties you spend your life avoiding. Comfort. The very thing you chase is quietly hollowing out what makes you capable of handling what life will inevitably ask of you. This is not a complaint about modern life. This is a warning about what we are becoming because of it. Comfort not as occasional rest, not as the earned reward after struggle, but comfort as the organizing principle of existence. Comfort as the silent religion of our age, worshipped at every turn, optimized at every opportunity, until there is nothing left of you but softness where strength should have grown. The Stoics understood something about human nature that we have forgotten in our rush toward convenience. They knew that character is not discovered. It is forged, and the forge requires heat. It requires pressure. It requires the very friction we have engineered out of modern existence. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the most powerful empire on earth while facing war, plague, and betrayal, wrote in his private meditations a truth that cuts against everything our culture now believes. A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials. He was not speaking metaphorically. He was describing the actual mechanics of how a human being becomes someone worth being. And those mechanics require something we have been systematically eliminating from our lives. Consider for a moment the world you inhabit. The temperature of your environment is controlled with precision. Food arrives at your door with a few taps on a screen. Entertainment flows endlessly, curated to your preferences, designed to require nothing of you but passive consumption. Physical labor has been automated. Discomfort has been outsourced. Inconvenience has been optimized into oblivion. And at first glance, this appears to be progress. This appears to be the very definition of a better life. But the Stoics would recognize immediately what we are too close to see. That in removing friction, we have not become free. We have become fragile. We have not eliminated difficulty. We have merely delayed our encounter with it, while simultaneously destroying our capacity to meet it when it arrives. Seneca, one of the wealthiest men in ancient Rome, practiced something that would seem insane by modern standards. Despite having access to every luxury his era could provide, he would periodically sleep on a hard floor. He would wear rough clothing. He would eat the simplest food. He would deliberately introduce discomfort into a life that did not require it. And when asked why a man of such means would choose such hardship, his answer revealed a truth we desperately need to recover. Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, "Is this the condition that I feared?" It is precisely in times of immunity from care that the soul should toughen itself beforehand for occasions of greater stress. If you would not have a man flinch when the crisis comes, train him before it comes. This is not masochism. This is not suffering for its own sake. This is the deliberate cultivation of capacity. Seneca understood that comfort is not neutral. It is not simply the absence of hardship. Comfort actively trains you, just as difficulty does. But comfort trains you in the wrong direction. It trains you to need more and more favorable conditions to function. It trains you to interpret the slightest friction as crisis. It trains your nervous system to sound alarms at inconveniences that would have been invisible to your grandparents. And over time, this training produces something the Stoics would have recognized as the most dangerous state a human being can occupy. It produces weakness disguised as well-being. Modern psychology has confirmed what the Stoics intuited thousands of years ago. There is a concept called Hormesis that describes how biological systems respond to stress. In the right doses, stressors do not damage us. They strengthen us. Exercise works this way. The controlled stress of lifting weights breaks down muscle fibers, and in the repair process, they grow back stronger. Your immune system works this way. Exposure to pathogens in appropriate doses teaches your body to fight them. Your mind works this way too. Challenges that stretch your capacity, difficulties that demand adaptation, friction that requires you to push through rather than around. These are not obstacles to your development. They are the very mechanism of it. And when you systematically remove them, you do not create a stronger version of yourself. You create a version of yourself that cannot handle what life will inevitably bring. The research on resilience is unambiguous on this point. Resilience is not an innate trait that some people possess and others lack. Resilience is built. It is constructed through exposure to manageable difficulties and the successful navigation of them. Each time you encounter a challenge and move through it rather than around it, you are laying down neural pathways that make the next challenge more manageable. You are training your nervous system to recognize that discomfort is not danger. You are building what psychologists call self-efficacy, the confidence that comes not from affirmation but from evidence. Evidence that you have faced hard things and survived them, that you are capable of more than the easy path would ever reveal. But here is the problem with a life engineered for comfort. It provides no such evidence. It offers no opportunities to build that capacity. And so when difficulty arrives, as it always eventually does, you meet it as a stranger meeting an invading army with no defenses, no training, no fortifications. Epictetus, who was born a slave and endured physical disability, taught his students to view hardship not as something to be avoided, but as something to be welcomed. He compared life to a wrestling match and said that the greater the difficulty, the more glory in surmounting it. Skillful pilots gain their reputation from storms and tempests. Think about that phrase for a moment. Skillful pilots gain their reputation from storms, not from calm seas, not from perfect conditions. The very thing that makes a pilot skillful is the thing most people would pray to avoid. And this is true not just for pilots, but for human beings in general. The qualities you most admire in others, their courage, their resilience, their ability to remain steady when everything around them shakes. These qualities were not born in comfort. They were forged in difficulty. They emerged precisely because those people encountered storms and learned to navigate them. Now consider what happens to a generation raised with the elimination of difficulty as the primary goal. What happens when every sharp edge has been padded, every frustration smoothed away, every moment of waiting eliminated by instant gratification? What happens when the entire apparatus of modern life is oriented toward ensuring that you never have to feel uncomfortable for more than a few seconds? The Stoics would predict exactly what we now observe: rising rates of anxiety and depression, decreasing distress tolerance, an entire population that reports feeling overwhelmed by challenges that previous generations would have considered ordinary. This is not because life has become harder. By almost every objective measure, life in the developed world has become easier than at any point in human history. This is because we have become softer. Our capacity to handle difficulty has atrophied from disuse. We have optimized ourselves into fragility. There is a phrase that circulates in Stoic thinking that captures this truth perfectly: character before comfort. It sounds simple. It sounds like a motivational poster you might see in a corporate office. But when you truly understand what it means and begin to live by it, it becomes one of the most radical reorientations of modern life imaginable. Character before comfort means that when you face a choice between the easy path and the path that builds who you are, you choose character. It means that you measure your days not by how little friction you encountered, but by what kind of person you became in navigating that friction. It means that you start to see difficulty not as an interruption of the good life, but as an essential ingredient of it. And this is where the Stoics diverge most sharply from the implicit philosophy of our age. We have been taught, through 1,000,000 advertisements and 1,000 self-help books and the entire orientation of consumer culture, that the goal is to feel good. That the measure of a life well lived is the presence of pleasant sensations and the absence of unpleasant ones. That comfort equals success and difficulty equals failure. But the Stoics asked a different question. They did not ask, "How can I feel good?" They asked, "How can I become good?" And they understood that these two questions lead in very different directions. The path to feeling good leads toward comfort, convenience, the elimination of friction. The path to becoming good leads through difficulty, through challenge, through the very things we have been taught to avoid. Marcus Aurelius spent the final years of his life on military campaigns, sleeping in tents, facing cold and disease and the constant threat of death. He could have remained in Rome, surrounded by luxury, insulated from hardship. He was the emperor. No one could have compelled him to leave. But he understood that his character, the very thing that made him fit to lead, required the testing that only difficulty could provide. In his meditations, he wrote, "What we achieve inwardly will change outer reality." He knew that the only lasting victory is the victory over oneself, and that victory cannot be won in comfort. There is a concept in Stoic philosophy called voluntary discomfort, and it is perhaps the most countercultural practice you could adopt in the modern world. It means deliberately choosing difficulty when ease is available. It means introducing friction into a life that has been designed to be frictionless. It means cold showers when hot water is abundant. It means walking when you could drive. It means sitting with boredom when entertainment is a tap away. It means saying no to the second helping when your body wants it, but does not need it. These practices sound small. They sound almost trivial in their simplicity. But their effect compounds over time in ways that transform who you are at the deepest level. When you practice voluntary discomfort, you are training yourself to understand that your well-being does not depend on favorable conditions. You are building evidence that you can handle difficulty without breaking. You are weakening the grip that comfort has on your psyche, the grip that makes you afraid of anything that threatens your ease. And perhaps most importantly, you are developing the capacity to choose. Most people do not choose comfort. They default to it. They are carried along by the path of least resistance because they lack the strength to choose anything else. But when you have practiced difficulty, when you have proven to yourself that you can endure what you do not prefer, you gain something that cannot be purchased or optimized into existence. You gain freedom. Not freedom from hardship, which is impossible, but freedom from fear of hardship, which is the only freedom that matters. Seneca described this with characteristic clarity. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Life is long enough, and a sufficiently generous amount has been given to us for the highest achievements if it were all well invested. But when it is wasted in heedless luxury and spent on no good activity, we are forced at last, by death's final constraint, to realize that it has passed away before we knew it was passing. And this is what comfort does to us. It does not extend our lives. It wastes them. It does not enrich our experience. It dulls it. It does not prepare us for what matters. It leaves us unprepared. Comfort is not the reward of a life well lived. It is often the thief of one. Consider the psychological research on flow states. those moments of peak experience when you are fully absorbed in a challenging activity, when your skills are stretched to their limit in pursuit of a worthy goal. These states, which represent some of the highest forms of human well-being, do not occur in comfort. They require difficulty. They require the precise kind of friction that comfort seeks to eliminate. The mountain climber does not experience flow while lounging at base camp. The musician does not experience it while playing pieces they mastered long ago. The athlete does not experience it in easy victories. Flow emerges at the edge of capacity, in the space between too easy and too hard, in the moment when difficulty demands everything you have. And if you have optimized difficulty out of your life, you have also optimized out the possibility of these peak experiences. You have traded the heights of human experience for a perpetual plateau of mild pleasantness. The Stoics would not have been surprised by any of this. They understood that the human soul, like the human body, requires challenge to thrive. They knew that a life without difficulty is not a life without suffering. It is a life that has traded intense, meaningful suffering for a low-grade, chronic suffering, the suffering of stagnation, of unused potential, of a self that never became what it could have been. And this is the cruelest trick of the comfort addiction. It promises to eliminate suffering, but delivers only a different kind of suffering. A suffering so subtle you may not even recognize it as such. The suffering of a life unlived. There is a moment in the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius that speaks directly to this. He writes of the obstacles that stand in his path, the difficulties he faces as emperor and as a man, and he offers a reframe that has echoed through the centuries. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This is not positive thinking. This is not pretending that difficulties are not difficult. This is a fundamental recognition that difficulty itself is the material from which character is constructed. When you encounter an obstacle and you move through it rather than around it, you are not merely solving a problem. You are becoming someone. You are building capacities that did not exist before. You are laying down the foundation for who you will be when the next obstacle arrives. The obstacle is not separate from the path. The obstacle is the path. Modern psychology has a term for what happens when you consistently avoid difficulty. It is called anxiety sensitivity. It describes a state in which you become increasingly afraid of the sensations associated with discomfort. When you avoid all situations that might trigger anxiety, you do not reduce your anxiety. You increase it. You teach your nervous system that those sensations are genuinely dangerous, that they must be avoided at all costs. And so the range of tolerable experience shrinks and shrinks until the smallest deviation from comfort feels like emergency. This is not resilience. This is prison. A prison constructed by the very avoidance strategies that promised freedom. And the only way out is through the discomfort you have been avoiding, through the difficulty you have been engineering out of existence, through the friction that your character requires to form. Epictetus taught his students a practice that cuts to the heart of this. When facing a challenging situation, he advised them to say to themselves, "This is training, not punishment, not misfortune. Training. The traffic jam that tests your patience is training. The difficult conversation you would rather avoid is training. The project that demands more of you than you feel capable of giving is training. The moment when your body wants to quit and your mind has to override it is training. Every difficulty, when approached with the right frame, becomes an opportunity to strengthen exactly those capacities that comfort would allow to atrophy. But there is a deeper truth here that we must confront. The Stoics did not advocate for difficulty because they enjoyed suffering. They advocated for it because they understood what we are in danger of forgetting: that the human being is not a creature designed for comfort, that our deepest fulfillment comes not from the absence of challenge, but from meaningful engagement with it, that the qualities we most admire in ourselves and others, courage, resilience, discipline, perseverance, are qualities that can only be developed through their exercise, and that a life arranged around the avoidance of difficulty is a life that will never access these qualities, never know what it is capable of, never become what it could have been. There is a psychological concept called post-traumatic growth that illuminates this truth. Researchers have found that many people who have undergone severe hardship do not merely return to their baseline level of functioning. They exceed it. They report greater appreciation for life, deeper relationships, increased personal strength, recognition of new possibilities, and enhanced spiritual development. This does not mean we should seek out trauma, but it does mean that difficulty is not merely something to be survived. It can be the very catalyst for becoming more than you were. And if this is true for severe hardship, how much more true is it for the ordinary difficulties we face daily? The difficulties we have been taught to eliminate, but which could be building us if we let them. Think about the person you most want to become. Not the person with the easiest life, not the person with the most comfort, but the person with the character you admire, the resilience you wish you had, the strength that would allow you to face whatever comes without flinching. That person was not built in comfort. That person was forged. And the forge is still available to you. It is available every time you choose the harder path because it is the path that builds. Every time you resist the impulse to optimize away friction. Every time you meet difficulty as training rather than punishment. Every time you remember that you were not designed for a frictionless life. You were designed to become someone, and becoming requires exactly the resistance you have been avoiding. Seneca offered a challenge to his readers that remains as radical today as it was 2,000 years ago. He wrote, "I judge you unfortunate because you have never lived through misfortune. You have passed through life without an opponent. No one can ever know what you are capable of, not even you. It takes trials to learn what we have in us." Think about that phrase. No one can ever know what you are capable of, not even you. This is what comfort steals from you. Not just strength, but self-knowledge. The person who has never been tested does not know who they are. They have theories about themselves, stories they tell themselves about their capabilities, but they have no evidence. And when the test finally comes, as it always does, they meet it as a stranger meets themselves in a crisis, with no idea what they will find. The Stoics knew that life would provide tests whether we wanted them or not. Death would come. Loss would come. Illness, betrayal, failure, circumstances beyond any control would arrive uninvited. And in that moment, the person who had trained would be ready. Not happy about it, not unaffected by it, but ready, capable, in possession of the inner resources that only difficulty can build. While the person who had spent their life in comfort would be devastated not just by the difficulty itself, but by the discovery of their own unpreparedness for it. There is a reason that every wisdom tradition, not just Stoicism, emphasizes the value of difficulty. There is a reason that every meaningful story ever told involves the protagonist facing and overcoming challenges. There is a reason that we instinctively admire those who have been tested and proven. It is because something deep in us recognizes that this is how human beings are built. Not in comfort, but in fire. Not in ease, but in resistance. Not in the absence of friction, but through it. Marcus Aurelius wrote near the end of his life, Never value anything as profitable that compels you to break your promise, lose your self-respect, hate any man, suspect, curse, act the hypocrite, or desire anything that needs walls or curtains. The walls and curtains he speaks of are the fortifications we build around our comfort, the barriers we erect to keep difficulty at bay. And he warns that anything we value so highly that it requires those fortifications is not worth valuing. Because those fortifications do not protect us. They imprison us. They make us smaller, weaker, more afraid. They trade the possibility of becoming someone for the guarantee of remaining no one. The invitation of Stoicism is not to suffer needlessly. It is not to reject all comfort or to seek out pain for its own sake. The invitation is to right-size comfort in your life, to see it clearly for what it is and for what it costs, to recognize that the relentless pursuit of ease has a price, and that price is your character. To understand that you were built for more than a frictionless existence, that you are capable of things you will never discover if you never allow yourself to be tested, that the very difficulties you have been avoiding could be the making of you. Tonight, as you let go of the day, consider this truth. Every time you choose comfort over character, you are making a withdrawal from an account that may already be running low. Every time you avoid difficulty that could strengthen you, you are choosing who you will not become. And every time you remember that the gem cannot be polished without friction, that skillful pilots gain their reputation from storms, that what stands in the way becomes the way, you are remembering something your soul already knows. That you were not made for ease. You were made for something far more important. You were made to become someone worth being. And that becoming happens not in spite of difficulty, but because of it. Seneca, writing to a friend who had asked for advice, offered words that could have been written yesterday for anyone caught in the trap of comfort optimization. He said, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." And then he offered this reflection: "I do not trust the calm waters that appear to lead me, for they may conceal shoals beneath. I am strengthened by the storms I have weathered, tempered by the fires I have walked through, made wise by the losses I have mourned. If you would strip these from me in the name of comfort, you would strip from me the very things that made me who I am." This is the paradox at the heart of the Stoic teaching on difficulty. The things we most want to avoid are often the things we most need. The challenges we pray will not come are often the challenges that would make us capable of the life we say we want. The friction we optimize away is the friction our character requires to form. And until we see this clearly, until we stop running from difficulty and start running toward who we could become through it, we will remain trapped in a comfort that is slowly, quietly, invisibly destroying the very thing that makes us capable of living. The Stoics were not pessimists. They did not advocate for difficulty because they believed life was suffering and we might as well get used to it. They advocated for difficulty because they were profound optimists about human potential. They believed that within every person was the capacity for wisdom, for courage, for resilience, for a kind of inner strength that no external circumstance could touch. But they also knew that this capacity would remain dormant, theoretical, unrealized without the heat of the forge to bring it forth. They trusted difficulty because they trusted what difficulty could create in a willing soul. And so tonight, the question is not whether difficulty will come. It will. The question is who you will be when it arrives. Will you meet it as someone who has been training, someone who has voluntarily chosen the harder path often enough that their capacity to handle hard things is strong? Or will you meet it as someone who has spent their life in pursuit of comfort, whose muscles of resilience have atrophied from disuse, whose character has never been tested and therefore remains unknown even to themselves. The ancient philosophers who gave us Stoicism believed that the purpose of philosophy was not to provide interesting ideas to think about. It was to provide a way of life that would make us capable of handling whatever life brought. And at the center of that way of life was this understanding that we must choose difficulty before difficulty chooses us. That we must train before the test arrives. That we must see comfort for what it is, not as the goal of existence, but as a temporary rest stop on a much longer journey, a journey toward becoming someone who does not need comfort to be okay, someone whose peace does not depend on conditions, someone who has been forged in the fire and emerged stronger for it. This is your inheritance. This is the wisdom of 2,000 years of human beings who faced far greater difficulties than most of us will ever know, and emerged not just intact, but elevated. They left us these teachings not as historical curiosities, but as living instructions for how to become fully human. And the first instruction, the one that makes all the others possible, is this: stop running from difficulty. Start running toward who you could become through it. Your character is not something you have. It is something you build, and the building requires materials that comfort will never provide. It requires the friction of challenge, the heat of hardship, the pressure of demands that exceed your current capacity. These are not obstacles to the good life. These are the good life, or at least the only path that leads there. The gem cannot be polished without friction, nor can you be perfected without trials. And the perfection the Stoics spoke of was not some unreachable ideal. It was simply this: becoming capable. Becoming someone who can handle what comes. Becoming someone whose peace does not shatter at the first sign of difficulty. Becoming someone worth being. That becoming is available to you. It is available right now, in this moment, in the next choice you make between the easy path and the path that builds. It is available in every difficulty you face, every friction you could either avoid or move through, every challenge that could be training if you let it be. The forge is waiting. It has always been waiting. The only question is whether you will step into it and allow it to do its ancient work. Allow it to polish the gem. Allow it to perfect what trials alone can perfect. Allow it to make you into someone you could never become in comfort. And when you do, when you finally release the desperate grip on ease and open yourself to the difficulty that builds, you will discover something the Stoics knew all along. That on the other side of the friction you feared is a version of yourself you could never have imagined, stronger than you thought possible, more capable than comfort would ever have revealed. Ready for whatever comes because you stopped running from what came before. That person is waiting for you. They have always been waiting, and the path to meet them runs not around difficulty but directly through it. This is the Stoic Promise. Not that life will be easy, it will not be. Not that difficulty can be avoided, it cannot be. But that you, in your deepest nature, are equipped for something far greater than comfort. That you were built not for ease but for meaning. That the very challenges you fear are the raw materials from which your greatest self will be constructed. And that if you trust this process, if you stop fighting difficulty and start learning from it, if you remember that character comes before comfort, always before comfort, you will become something the comfortable can never become. You will become someone who cannot be broken by circumstance, someone whose peace comes from within and therefore cannot be stolen by what happens without. Someone who has been tested and knows what they are made of. someone who has walked through the fire and carries its strength forever after. That someone is not a fantasy, that someone is a possibility. And the path to that possibility runs through every difficulty you face from this moment forward. The question is not whether you are capable of becoming that person. The Stoics believed with their whole hearts that you are. The question is only whether you will choose the path that leads there, whether you will remember in the moment when comfort calls that comfort is not your friend. That comfort, pursued as the highest good, is slowly destroying the very character that would make your life worth living. Choose differently. Choose the harder path. Choose to be forged rather than softened. Choose character before comfort. And discover, as the Stoics discovered, that the life waiting on the other side of that choice is worth every moment of friction it took to get there. You were not built for ease. You were built to become. And becoming requires everything that comfort would take from you. Begin tonight. Begin by letting this truth settle into your bones. The gem cannot be polished without friction, nor you without trials. And then let the trials do their work. Let them polish you. Let them perfect you. Let them reveal what has been waiting all along beneath the softness that comfort created. There is something harder there, something stronger, something that cannot be broken by any storm because it was built by storms. It was forged in the fire, and it is ready to meet whatever comes. That is who you are becoming. That is who the Stoics knew you could become. And that is the person waiting on the other side of the comfort you no longer need.